So I'm going to apologize in advance for any sort of technical glitches because I am a Mac person, but I'm going to do my best. Okay, slideshow. Where's the slideshow view? From beginning, right? But that's not the beginning. Okay, there we go. So thanks for having me. I'm Renee Ebersole, as she said, and I'm really grateful to be here talking to you today about the nation's special issue on the future of food and an article that I wrote in this issue about Monsanto and a little-known product named Roundup. About a year ago, before this magazine was published, about a year before the magazine was published, I was thinking about possible story ideas and sort of casting around, as journalists tend to do. I often talk to people who are researchers or who do interesting things just to get story ideas. And I'm a contributor to a nonprofit called the Food Environmental Reporting Network. And so I was looking for something related to food and farming. I called up a friend of mine who's, his name is Joel Sartori, and he's a photographer for National Geographic. He lives in Nebraska. And I said, Joel, I'm really looking for some story ideas, maybe from your region. Do you have anything that's not getting covered? And he said, you know, no one's covering Roundup enough. And he said, we're swimming in this stuff. And his wife and his oldest son have both had cancer, so he's kind of invested in the topic. And so I said, that sounds like an interesting idea, and I pitched it to Fern, and they went for it. And then the way they work with other publications is they sort of pitch it to other places. So the Nation decided to partner up with us on this story. This is organic chemist John E. Franz, who in 1970 changed the future of farming and gardening with the invention of a chemical called glyphosate, a broad-spectrum post-emergence herbicide effective at killing a wide variety of plants, including grasses, broadleaf, and woody plants. Franz sold his discovery, would you believe, to Monsanto for $5. And 4 years later, Monsanto released Roundup. Today, Roundup generates $4 billion in annual revenue for its maker. So with Monsanto's release of Roundup, it launched a legendary marketing campaign. And one of them was marked by a Western whistle, which I kind of love, so I'm going to play this for you guys. Okay, now.
On a weed-free season, that's how I roll. So I reach for Roundup Extended Control with the all-new.
Let's go back to the beginning.
I want a weed-free season, that's how I roll. So I reach for Roundup Extended Control with the all-new no-pump one-touch wand. It kills weeds dead and keeps weeds gone. Roundup Extended Control. I just spray them weeds, then spray them cracks. The weeds are gone and they won't be back. Driveway patio, I just spray once and it's adios weeds for up to 4 sweet months. Roundup Extended Control. Roundup Extended Control with the new one-touch wand.
Isn't that great? See, now I want to get out of here. I want to make sure that closes. Okay. And so how many of you have ever used Roundup? I'm curious. Yeah, me too. I used it for some poison ivy. It seemed like there was no other real safe option, and pretty much everyone says it's benign and you don't really have to worry about it. Use caution if you do use it. So from the time of its release, glyphosate use exploded. You can see on this slide that from 1992 to 2016, you can see all that red. And it was by 2007, it was the most used herbicide in the United States agricultural sector and the second most used in homes and gardens, government and industry and commercial applications. From the late 1970s to 2016, there was a 100-fold increase in the frequency and volume of application of glyphosate herbicides worldwide. The way it works is it targets an enzyme that's not found in animals or humans. So when it comes to plants, it just kills everything. It kills indiscriminately. It doesn't matter what it is. But now you have a chemical that kills every plant in its path. So how do you protect the crops from the chemical? Monsanto's answer to that question was Roundup Ready seeds, genetically engineered to survive the chemical. Okay, so yeah, Monsanto's answer to Roundup Ready, to the chemical that they'd invented was the Roundup Ready seeds. Today, more than 90% of domestic soy, cotton, and corn crops in the U.S., 168 million acres of land, are engineered to be glyphosate resistant. Americans have sprayed 1.8 million tons of glyphosate on our crops, lawns, and gardens. The number is 9.4 million globally. And as you saw, the problem is crops are becoming resistant to glyphosate. The chemical still kills most weeds, but a small percentage of them always survive. These are called superweeds. They're analogous to antibiotic immune microbes in humans. The plant that you saw there was pigweed. It can grow 3 inches a day and reach 7 feet tall. They've invaded 90 million acres of agricultural lands to date. Experts say the spread of superweeds is causing the intensification of pesticide use in larger doses and combined with other chemicals over a longer period of time. And some of the superweeds are practically unstoppable, like pigweed. The second problem for Monsanto, and the point of our discussion today, is this question of whether Roundup causes cancer. Monsanto is currently fighting allegations that glyphosate might not be as safe as it was advertised in those catchy commercials, particularly when combined with other chemicals in Roundup products and in additional chemicals, which, as I told you, they're starting to do. In 2015, a global panel of experts with the World Health Organization's International Agency of Research on Cancer, I hate acronyms, but let's just call them IARC to make things simple. They ruled that glyphosate is a probable carcinogen, in conflict with determinations by regulatory agencies in the US and other countries. IARC classifies materials into 4 categories: from carcinogenic to humans, class 1, to probably not carcinogenic, class 4. IARC included glyphosate in group 2A, meaning probably carcinogenic to humans, alongside DDT, the insecticide malathion, and strains of human papillomavirus. The IARC experts considered studies of disease patterns in human populations and experiments on human tissues and cells as well as lab animals. They reported evidence that glyphosate causes cancer in animal models. They also concluded that studies clearly show DNA and chromosomal damage in human cells, damage that can lead to the emergence of cancer. They did not, however, go so far as to say the chemical definitely causes cancer. The lead scientist of the report explained it to me this way: there wasn't enough evidence to say that we know this stuff causes cancer, like we know with smoking and alcohol and benzene. For those, there's no doubt they cause cancer. Probable means quite a lot of evidence that it causes cancer, but there's still some doubt. So IARC evaluates hazard, which, although it sounds the same, is different than risk. The Environmental Protection Agency and many other regulatory agencies consider risk, and this is why there's some confusion about the IARC ruling. Within months of the IARC ruling, nearly 600 scientists in 72 countries signed a manifesto calling for a ban on the spraying of glyphosate-based herbicides. Even before the release of the IARC report, some countries, El Salvador, Colombia, Brazil, Bermuda, Germany, France, the Netherlands, and Sri Lanka, had already instituted bans or were considering forming one. California uses IARC rulings as the gold standard for labeling chemicals under what's called the California Proposition 65. Prop 65, officially known as the Safe Drinking Water and Toxic Enforcement Act, was enacted as a ballot initiative in 1986. The law protects the state's drinking water sources from being contaminated with chemicals known to cause cancer, birth defects, or other reproductive harm, and it requires businesses to inform Californians about exposures to those chemicals. Prop 65 requires the state to maintain and update a list of chemicals known to the state to cause cancer or reproductive toxicity. When the California Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment announced its intention in January 2016 to add the herbicide glyphosate to the list, Monsanto sued the state. They didn't want to put any sort of label on the bottle. The Monsanto attorney argued in court that a warning label would damage the company's profits because customers would stop buying Roundup if they perceived there was a risk. He said it will absolutely be used in ways that harm Monsanto. The company continues to maintain glyphosate has a long history of safe use. They say the evaluations spanning 4 decades have the overwhelming conclusion of that the product is safe, and if it's used in accordance with label instructions, it doesn't present a risk of cancer to humans or any problems to wildlife and the environment. Monsanto lost that lawsuit against the state of California, and then in last April they lost an appeal too. If nothing changes, glyphosate sold in California will soon have a warning label on it, probably by about June next year. Monsanto, of course, is still fighting that decision, and the company is also looking at a bigger picture by supporting a trade group called the American Chemistry Council, and they have a newly launched battle called Against the battle, or the Twitter campaign, is called Glyphosate is Vital. And it asserts the main ingredient in Roundup is not only safe, but also the backbone of sustainable farming. There's one particular cancer that's at the center of this debate. It's called non-Hodgkin lymphoma. It's a variety of cancer that starts in the white blood cells. The most common early presentation in non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is swelling in a lymph node, normally in the neck. As the disease progresses, it moves to other areas of the body. The overall 5-year survival rate for people with non-Hodgkin lymphoma is 71%. When it goes to 10 years, it's 60%. Cancer experts estimate that there will be about 20,000 deaths from non-Hodgkin lymphoma in 2019. Even people who don't have cancer are concerned about the prevalence of glyphosate in the environment. Glyphosate residue has been found in many common foods, from Cheerios to cherries. Glyphosate has become so omnipresent in the environment that recent studies show nearly all of us have some of it in our bodies right now. The detox project, supported by a citizen group called Sustainable Pulse, investigated the presence of glyphosate in humans and found that 86% of people tested from regions across the country had the chemical present in their urine. 86%. In another preliminary study, researchers tested and tracked the presence of the chemical in 69 expectant mothers in Indiana. They found glyphosate residues in 90% of the women. The authors of that study said the findings were alarming because the residues appeared to correlate with early baby deliveries and low birth weights. Those babies are at increased risk of diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure. He said he believes that people should be concerned because the fact that they were able to find adverse effects on the small number of people they tested implies a larger study is needed to find if it's prevalent everywhere else. So I often act as a guinea pig for some of my stories. And while I was reporting this story, I volunteered to have my own urine tested for glyphosate. I was surprised to learn that I had as much glyphosate in my urine that day as a Midwestern farmer who sprayed his crop yesterday. I don't know why. I wonder how that happened. I eat fairly healthy. I eat a lot of organic fruits and vegetables. In order for them to know why I had that much glyphosate in my body, they'd have to study my actions, they'd have to monitor what food I'm eating, and they'd have to do that over a long period of time. So that's why they're doing these larger studies, most of them have already started. Senior scientists with the Environmental Working Group, a nonprofit, say few chemicals are deemed hazardous because the tolerance level is set too high. In other words, it's hard to get caught speeding if you have a 500 mile per hour speed limit. They say it doesn't mean a lot to public health that most foods are compliant with standards because those standards allow for so much pesticide in the environment to be present. In addition, the levels are based on healthy adult men. Rarely are they looking at women and children in these early studies. Children, infants, and unborn babies are particularly vulnerable to chemicals because their organ systems are still growing. It's a very complex process, experts say, and if anything disrupts that progression of growth, the developmental consequences can be permanent. Because of their small size, kids' pesticide exposure is higher pound per pound. If there's any pesticide in the air, the food, or water, children are going to pick up proportionately more of it. They also do things most adults don't do. They roll on the floor, they roll on the lawn, they put their hands in their mouths. All normal things for kids to do, but it magnifies the exposure. Diseases have a longer time to manifest in children too. Experts say human disease caused by environmental exposures takes years or even decades to develop. Childhood pesticide exposure has been linked to long-term health problems, including cancer, cognitive impairment, attention disorders, autism, Parkinson's disease, and even depression. The inherent problem, some experts say, is pesticides are designed to kill things. So while I was reporting this story, I got to meet some of the plaintiffs who were suing Monsanto. And this woman, her name is Teri Mccall. She lost her husband, Jack, in 2015 at the age of 69 years old. He was a farmer growing persimmons, citrus, avocados on a 20-acre farm near San Luis Obispo, about 4 hours south of San Francisco. It's a really beautiful area. It's a gorgeous ride down there. Teri showed me around her farm, and she said that Jack tried not to use chemicals, but he did use Roundup, especially in some areas where he couldn't get with the tractor, because the person at the farm store told him it was safe. In 2011, Jack developed a rash on his neck that a doctor determined was skin cancer, cutaneous B-cell lymphoma, usually benign and confined to the skin. 4 years later, Jack felt swelling in his lymph nodes. That time the diagnosis was grim, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Undergoing chemotherapy and radiation, Jack grew very thin and weak, and on Christmas Eve, Teri found him with his eyes rolled back in his head and his mouth twisted up. He'd had a stroke. Teri and the children spent the night at Jack's bedside in the hospital, and the next morning, Christmas Day, 6 months after his diagnosis, she decided to have him removed from life support. She says it was the worst moment of her life. Now she believes Roundup was the cause of Jack's death. She also says maybe it was what caused her dog, her Labrador Retriever, to die as well. His name was Duke. He was 9 years old, and he followed Jack everywhere on the farm, and he died of lymphoma at 9. In early 2016, Teri Mccall joined farmers, gardeners, migrant workers, and landscapers represented by multiple law firms to sue Monsanto in the federal court case. Another plaintiff named John Barton is a 68-year-old farmer. He's lived and worked in California farms for most of his life. He said he's used Roundup since the very beginning of its debut. His cancer's now spread from both sides of his body. Even though he no longer uses Roundup, he's continually exposed to it because he lives in the heart of the San Joaquin Valley, one of the nation's biggest food-producing areas. They even call it the food basket of the world. There are hundreds of miles of agricultural fields in San Joaquin. If you drive through it, it's just amazing. It's like a dust bowl. There's hundreds of miles and not a single farmhouse in sight. And for all of you who grew up in farm country or who live here in the middle of farm country, you're familiar with what a farm typically looks like. There's a house, big green fields. This looks nothing like that. It's large-scale agriculture tended by immigrant laborers who spend 90-degree days in the heat and dust with very few bathroom breaks and constant fear of being deported if they're caught illegally. Some of them have cancer, and some of those people have joined in a lawsuit against Monsanto, which has been a big risk for them. So the discovery phase of the lawsuits has churned up millions of pages of documents, including emails, memos, and scientific reports that plaintiff attorneys and environmental activists say illustrate Monsanto colluded with the EPA and other agencies to hide the dangers of their #1 selling chemical. Monsanto denies these charges, claiming that the attorneys are cherry-picking the documents to create a false narrative. This is like really the best stuff for investigative journalists when they start releasing all these papers from a lawsuit, and the attorneys have been very cooperative that way. So Marion Copley, you see her quote there, she was an EPA toxicologist who worked for 30 years researching the effects of chemicals on mice. In March of 2013, she was dying of breast cancer, and she wrote a letter to a colleague named Jess Rowland. He's a deputy director of the EPA's pesticide division, well, former. Rowland led the Cancer Assessment Review Committee, which was evaluating glyphosate. Copley was also serving on that committee. In her letter, Copley described how the property that makes glyphosate such a potent pesticide, its ability to target an enzyme that plants need to grow, also plays a role in the formation of tumors in humans. She named 14 specific methods by which it could do the job. And then she wrote, any of those mechanisms alone can cause tumors, but glyphosate causes all of them simultaneously. It is essentially certain that glyphosate causes cancer. She also accused Rowland of behaving unethically, intimidating staff, changing reports to favor industry. For once in your life, she wrote, listen to me and don't play your politically conniving games with the science to favor the registrants. For once, do the right thing and don't make decisions based on how it affects your bonus. In closing her letter, she wrote, I have cancer, and I don't want these serious issues in the Health Effects Division to go unaddressed before I go to my grave. I have done my duty. And she died about 6 months later. Monsanto has consistently pointed to the EPA's determination that glyphosate is not carcinogenic, to refute studies suggesting otherwise. However, the Copley letter fanned the flames of suspicion about possible collusion between EPA and Monsanto. Adding more fuel to the fire, the EPA in May 2016 released a new report that concluded glyphosate is not likely carcinogenic to humans, but then it retracted the report only days later. Jess Rowland was the one who released the report. He released it on a Friday. On Monday, they retracted it. But in that time, that really brief period of time, Monsanto seized on the moment to put out a press release. And it said, once again, EPA concludes that glyphosate does not cause cancer. Last December, the EPA released a new version of that leaked report about glyphosate. The report stated that glyphosate is not likely to be carcinogenic to humans. Of course, the determination contradicted the IARC's 2015 ruling, and one of the reasons is that difference between hazard and risk that we talked about. Remember, the distinction is important because hazard assessments evaluate whether there is some chance, under some circumstances, that a chemical can cause cancer. The EPA's goal is to consider what's called a dose response. What's the risk that a person might develop cancer related to real-world dosage? The agency's assessment said there's no risk. However, there's another distinction between EPA and IARC that warrants caution, and it's often not talked about. In its review, the cancer agency considers only peer-reviewed research. But the EPA looks at that research as well as research provided by the registrant or by the company that's making the chemical. That they don't make that publicly available because they say that's protected, it's under copyright. So they do provide it to the EPA, and the EPA looks at all of it, but obviously there's a conflict of interest there. IARC says the rule to consider only peer-reviewed published data in their rule is meant to prevent outcomes motivated by anything other than science. More than 4,000 Roundup cancer suits are working their way through state courts, largely in Missouri, where Monsanto is based, but also in other states, including Arizona, Montana, Delaware, California, Nebraska, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. In addition, 450 plaintiffs are represented in a federal lawsuit centralized in San Francisco. In March, that suit cleared a major hurdle when the presiding judge ruled that there was enough evidence to indicate glyphosate generally causes cancer. This is something that the court looks at in order for it to actually go to a jury trial. And that ruling allows individual plaintiffs to present their case in front of a jury. It hasn't been scheduled yet. This summer, Dwayne Lee Johnson, however, became the first plaintiff to face off against Monsanto in state court. Johnson used to go to work at 5 a.m. in the morning to spray pesticides on the edges of school parking lots and sports fields before the kids arrived. Even after he was diagnosed with cancer, according to his court testimony, he kept on spraying. No one had ever told him that Roundup weed killer caused cancer. To the contrary, he said, the person who certified him as an integrated pest manager assured him that Roundup is, quote, safe enough to drink, something that they've been saying for a long, long time. People have even gone on YouTube and they drank the stuff to show that it doesn't harm them. It won't kill them instantaneously. Johnson used the industrial strength Roundup product Ranger Pro when he was working from 2012 to 2015 for the Benicia Unified School District, about a half hour southeast of Napa. He testified that twice during the course of his employment, he was drenched with the chemical. The first time happened in 2012. He was working at an elementary school when the hose of his sprayer broke. It got caught in a sidewalk crack and disconnected, shooting fluid all over the place. He said it was like an open wound. As he was trying to stop the flow, Ranger Pro soaked the inside of his Tyvek suit and his clothes. He stripped out of the clothing and he washed up as best as he could, but he had to keep working. So he did that for another 6 hours before he got home to take a shower. In spring 2014, Johnson said he started to develop what he initially called man scars, everyday rashes and scratches that come with hard work. But when he developed a mysterious lesion on his inner right thigh, he feared something worse, and he went to the doctor, who referred him to a dermatology specialist. That August, he was diagnosed with skin cancer. But despite his concerns about the cancerous lesions on his skin, Johnson kept working for the school district. It was a pretty good job. In January 2015, he had another accident. A backpack sprayer containing Ranger Pro leaked and again drenched the inside of his Tyvek suit. In August, a San Francisco jury unanimously awarded Johnson $289 million in the suit against Monsanto. However, the judge considered overturning the jury's verdict because she didn't think that there was compelling evidence to show Monsanto knew Roundup caused cancer. Last week, she finally decided to honor the ruling, and she reduced the settlement amount, though, to $78 million. Johnson's attorneys, he and his attorneys have until about, I think it's December 7th, to either accept the new amount or ask for new trial. And there are several more state suits that are working through the courts now. We'll probably see like 3 or 4 more before the end of 2019. So German drug maker Bayer finalized its more than $60 billion acquisition of Monsanto last June. At that time, the company announced its plans to retire the 117-year-old brand Monsanto. That step will eliminate the name that has been a lightning rod for environmental activists lobbying for decades for better regulation of chemical pesticides. As Monsanto disappears into the woodwork, the question is whether plaintiffs will triumph over Bayer in the ongoing court battles. The stakes in these cases are high. Monsanto, for cancer victims, for consumers, for farmers. For better or worse, today's agricultural system relies on pesticides, all of which come with inherent dangers. Some argue that if Roundup is removed, we might be left with herbicides that are far worse. If you can't use glyphosate, what are you going to use? But many agronomists are optimistic about new practices and technologies to control weeds with fewer chemicals. One promising invention involves a piece of machinery that attaches to a combine at harvest time and pulverizes the weed seeds before they can take hold the next season. Certain farming methods can reduce the need for pesticides too, including integrated weed management, which uses a combination of herbicides and crop rotation. Some farmers reduce the risk of reduce the use of chemicals by planting winter cover crops, such as legumes and grasses, which add nutrients to the soil and reduce erosion and prevent weeds from gaining a foothold. Avoiding pesticides can be tough. Buying organic is an obvious choice, but it can be expensive. How many of you guys buy organic food? It's kind of expensive, right? The Environmental Working Group helps people prioritize those purchases by publishing these health guides, the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15, to help people make good choices. At the top of the Dirty Dozen list, you find strawberries, nectarines, apples, peaches, some of my favorite fruits. But after seeing this list, I immediately stopped buying non-organic strawberries. If I buy other items on that list, I try to purchase those organic. Or sometimes I just opt not to buy them at all. Just make something else. Especially if they're not in season, because if they aren't, they're likely shipped from an area of the country where the pesticide use is very heavy. It's probably coming from San Joaquin Valley. On the flip side, I was thrilled to see avocados on the top of the Clean 15. My family eats a lot of avocados. As consumers, we have power to influence the future of farming by choosing to support farmers who are taking steps to grow food sustainably and environmentally. The easiest thing that you can do is to get to know your farmers. Stop at farmers markets. If you don't know where to find a farmers market, go to localharvest.org, punch in your zip code, and it'll give you a list of local markets. When you get there, talk to the farm vendors. Find out what they're feeding their chickens. Ask them how they deal with really pesky weeds. These conversations not only inform us, they also tell farmers and hopefully the big agricultural companies that we care about how our food's grown. Thank you.
Thank you.